Решение о применении ядерного оружия может быть принято только в том случае, если наша система предупреждения ракетного нападения зафиксировала не только старт ракет, но и дала точный прогноз и траектории полетов, и время падения головных частей на территорию Российской Федерации. Это называется ответ на встречный удар. То есть, если кем-то принято решение уничтожить Россию, тогда у нас возникает законное право ответить: да, для человечества это будет глобальная катастрофа. Для мира будет глобальная катастрофа. Но я все-таки как гражданин России и глава российского государства тогда хочу задаться вопросом: а зачем нам такой мир, если там не будет России?
As Russia adds even more forces to those already encircling Ukraine, the U.S. issuing its strongest warning yet to Vladimir Putin. Secretary of State Blinken promising severe economic sanctions if a single Russian soldier crosses the border.
In the event that there is a renewed Russian incursion, Russian forces going into Ukraine, there is going to be a swift, a severe, and united response.
With Russian troops massing along Ukraine's northern, southern, and eastern borders, Europe now teetering on the brink of war. The State Department still weighing whether to evacuate non-essential U.S. embassy personnel, but warning American citizens in Ukraine not working for the U.S. that if war does break out, they shouldn't expect to be evacuated by the government. Britain also accusing the Kremlin of preparing to mount a coup in Kiev. The goal of the alleged plot? To topple Ukraine's democratically elected president and replace him with an ex-politician friendly to Moscow.
This is very much part of the Russian playbook.
Russia dismissing the British allegations as disinformation. A first load of U.S. weapons arriving this weekend to help Ukrainian troops defend themselves. But President Biden under pressure at home and abroad to do more and fast. Ukraine urging Biden to impose punishing sanctions on Russia now. A call echoed by both Republicans and Democrats in Congress.
I believe that we need to act now.
Tonight, Ukrainian volunteers arming themselves and preparing for the worst.
And Raf joins me now. Raf, what do we know about the U.S. family members being told to leave now?
Yeah, Kate, in just the last few minutes, the State Department ordering the families of U.S. Embassy staff in Kiev to leave the country because of the threat of invasion. They're also saying non-essential embassy staff can leave if they choose to. Kate?
Are focused 100% on dealing with the people's priorities, including the UK's leading role in protecting freedom around the world. And with permission, I will make a statement about the United Kingdom's response to the situation in Ukraine. This winter, we've witnessed a spectacle that we hope to be banished from our continent. A large and powerful country massing troops and tanks on the border of a neighbour with the obvious threat of invading. Russia has, of course, already attacked Ukraine, illegally annexing 10,000 square miles of her territory in 2014, igniting a war in the Donbass region, and Ukraine has scarcely known a day of peace ever since. Now Ukraine faces the danger of a renewed invasion, and this time the force arrayed on Ukraine's frontier comprises over 100,000 troops, far bigger than anything Russia has deployed against her before. If the worst happens and the destructive firepower of the Russian army were to engulf Ukraine's towns and cities, I shudder to contemplate the tragedy that would ensue. Ukrainians have every moral and legal right to defend their country, and I believe their resistance would be dogged and tenacious, and the bloodshed comparable to the first war in Chechnya or Bosnia, Mr. Speaker, or any other conflict that Europe has endured since 1945. No one would gain from such a catastrophe. Russia would create a wasteland in a country which, as she continuously reminds us, is composed of fellow Slavs, and Russia would never be able to call it peace. For months, Britain has worked in lockstep with the United States and our allies across Europe to avoid such a disaster. We've sought to combine dialogue with deterrence, emphasizing how a united Western alliance would exact a forbidding price for any Russian incursion into Ukraine, including by imposing heavy economic sanctions. And at the same time, we stand ready, as we always have, to address any legitimate Russian concerns through honest diplomacy. On the 13th of December, I spoke to President Putin, and I stressed that NATO had no thought of encircling or otherwise threatening his country, and that Russia enjoyed as much right as any other state to live in peace and security. But, as I said to him, Ukraine also enjoys an equal and symmetrical right to that of Russia. And I said that any attack on his neighbor would be followed by tougher sanctions against Russia, further steps to help Ukraine defend herself, and by an increased NATO presence to protect our allies on NATO's eastern flank. The truth is that Russia's goal is to keep NATO forces away from her borders. If that is Russia's goal, then invading Ukraine could scarcely be more counterproductive. My right honourable friends, the Foreign and Defence Secretaries, have both conveyed the same message to President Putin, and I'm prepared, of course, ready to speak to him again. Meanwhile, the American Deputy Secretary of State met her Russian counterpart in Geneva on the 10th of January, and the NATO-Russia Council gathered 2 days later, as the House knows. The American Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, met the Russian Foreign Minister last Friday, and the US administration has confirmed President Biden's willingness to have another meeting with President Putin, continuing the bilateral dialogue they began last year. But credible deterrence is the other side of the coin. Last night I held a virtual meeting with President Biden, President Macron, Chancellor Scholz, President Duda, Prime Minister Draghi, General Secretary Stoltenberg, President Michel, and President von der Leyen. We agreed that we would respond in unison to any Russian attack on Ukraine. In unison, by imposing coordinated and severe economic sanctions, heavier than anything we have done before against Russia. And we agreed on the necessity of finalising these measures as swiftly as possible in order to maximise their deterrent effect. We in the UK will not hesitate to toughen our national sanctions against Russia in response to whatever President Putin may do, and the House will soon hear more on this from my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary. We've already declassified compelling intelligence exposing Russian intent to install a puppet regime in Ukraine, and we will continue to disclose any Russian use of cyber attacks, false flag operations, or disinformation. Amid all these pressures, Ukraine asks for nothing except to be allowed to live in peace and to seek her own alliances, as every sovereign country has a right to do.
The Ukrainian government.
If a single additional Russian force goes into Ukraine in an aggressive way, as I said, that would trigger a swift, a severe, and a united response from us and from Europe.
ABC News confirming the Biden administration is now considering sending more troops to the region. It would be on top of severe financial and trade sanctions against Russia, including the possible restriction of Russia's access to U.S. technology, in particular semiconductors that enable computer and smartphone technology, making it more difficult for everyday Russians to get consumer electronics. But officials stress no decisions have been made yet. In California this weekend, the U.S. military shipping out additional supplies to Ukraine, following the administration's approval of $200 million in defensive security assistance. This comes as Russia has massed at least 100,000 troops near its border with Ukraine, prompting a bipartisan call for immediate action.
Let's make sure that we are pushing back right now with stiff sanctions.
But the very strongest sanctions, the sorts of sanctions that we use to bring Iran to the table, is something that we should hold out as a deterrent to prevent Putin from taking the last step of invading Ukraine.
The U.S. says there would be serious consequences after a new British intelligence report accused Russia of plotting to install a pro-Russian leader in Ukraine. Russia is dismissing the comments as disinformation.
Решение о применении ядерного оружия может быть принято только в том случае, если наша система предупреждения ракетного нападения зафиксировала не только старт ракет, но и дала точный прогноз и траектории полетов, и время падения головных частей на территорию Российской Федерации. Это называется ответ на встречный удар. То есть, если кем-то принято решение уничтожить Россию, тогда у нас возникает законное право ответить: да, для человечества это будет глобальная катастрофа. Для мира будет глобальная катастрофа. Но я все-таки как гражданин России и глава российского государства тогда хочу задаться вопросом: а зачем нам такой мир, если там не будет России?